Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to chat with you about the anxious preoccupied attachment style and what it takes for them to forgive. And I'm going to address this video in terms of forgiveness after an argument, after a challenge, some kind of setback in a relationship, an obstacle, or a point of dishonesty that might have taken place. And you can sort of take these principles and you can expand them out and think about, oh, what would this look like if there was a huge betrayal in the relationship? How can I apply these principles? Or what if, there was a breakup and I want to get back together? How can I apply these principles? And in these cases, the same underlying principles will still apply. So before I dive into the content, we are still supporting our community, looking out as much as we can for everybody. So I'm still trying to create a daily video. I know things are starting to open back up and turn around a little bit, but I also think that it's probably going to be a bit of an interesting next few months anyways for many different people for different reasons. So here to support you guys, making a daily video. We are doing a support sale. So it's the coupon code is with you. It's all one word, and it's for 25% off of membership bundles for 3 months, 6 months, as well as individual course purchases, like single course purchases themselves. So you can use that coupon code with you, all one word, or you can also reach out to my team for scholarship opportunities, different offerings that we're doing to help right now. And you can email info@personaldevelopmentschool.com to learn more about that. So let's talk about this. So first and foremost, one of the really prominent things that I've noticed about anxious preoccupied attachment styles is that they forgive quite easily in many cases, but not always fully. So what I often find is that the anxious will forgive and let go, but it's almost like this is what's happening inside of them. It's like the pain of having a disconnect in the relationship and the potential threat that that poses to a relationship, and the desire to feel attached and close in order to feel safe. Because remember, anxious preoccupied, unlike the other insecure attachment styles, one of their big underlying belief systems is like closeness or attachment equals safety. Whereas fearful avoidance don't really have that. They're like, yeah, it feels good and it equals connection, but it doesn't really equal safety. And dismissive avoidance are definitely like, no, that does not equal safety. Vulnerability is not good. Attachment is not, a super good feeling. But the anxious preoccupied attachment style feels that way. So what I often see is like there are these competing needs within your mind, where it's like part of you has these needs to like, really make sure work's put in and hold things to a higher standard if there's some sort of betrayal or dishonesty or pain point in a relationship, or a boundary you want to set out. And often that is in competition with the need to reconnect quickly and feel safe again. And so sometimes by accident, the anxious preoccupied will drop their own boundaries prematurely if they could like pause, and if they knew, for example, that you having a boundary right now and you taking the time to move through your feelings and get your needs met because of this challenge. Maybe it was like somebody lied to you in a relationship, or maybe somebody didn't tell, withheld something from you, or there was some kind of like betrayal, let's say. Oftentimes, like the anxious actually needs a moment as a human being to process these things and to communicate about it further and to say, listen, this is what I need next time, and to hold boundaries up and see those boundaries and needs through. But that's in competition with this overlying need based on fear that's like, we need to reconnect immediately. We need to get better immediately. Quick, we have to fix this. We need to feel connected and feel safe and feel close. And so sometimes they accidentally forego or disown or betray their own boundaries because this is taking precedence. The need for safety and connection is taking precedence. And what this leads to is that comment or that statement I was saying, where it's like they forgive easily or quickly, but not always fully, because sometimes if this underlying thing isn't dealt with, that boundary, maybe somebody said something rude to you, spoke to you in an not an abusive way, because that should just not be acceptable, but in like an impolite way, like a rude way, made a like rude passive aggressive comment. Maybe like that's not okay for you, but maybe you let it be okay because you're just so blindsided by the fear and the need for closeness that you kind of let things slide more than you actually want to. And so what this is going to create is this like reconnection and relief, but then underneath, like at the beneath the surface, these like subconscious elements of resentment can start building and bubbling, and they can actually fester over time. And this is part of the reason it is so crucial to be able to recognize, hey, if I'm not forgiving fully, there's probably an underlying reason or pattern that I need to deal with. And this is probably going to have to do with meeting your own needs, expressing your own needs, believing that you can, this is a really important one, believing that you can have needs and express those needs, and that's not going to create a disconnect or an abandonment in a relationship. A lot of anxious preoccupied have this underlying belief system, like if I need too much or desire too much or request too much, then the person's just going to think it's exhausting and leave. But usually what this does instead is it creates repression of your needs. Then it creates resentment because you're not communicating and speaking up. And basically, resentment is a lack of needs being met combined with a lack of communication. And so then you have resentment. And then when something does happen, you overreact to that because it was like this volcano waiting to erupt. It was like all these things building up in the background. And it's actually that overreaction and sometimes emotional dumping that actually pushes people away. Versus if you communicated your needs consistently and felt like you deserved to communicate them and it was okay and it was safe, and you communicated directly and consistently over time, you would actually see that the opposite takes place, that there's more of a bonding and a connection in a relationship instead of a pulling apart. And so, you want to make sure that you feel safe to communicate, safe to share, safe to express, so that when you forgive, you are truly forgiving because the underlying problem is resolved. And the other point I want to mention here is that also sometimes the anxious person forgives more easily, but not fully in the places they already have fear. So, let's say you have this wound and the wound is like, I might be abandoned. And let's say somebody kind of like doesn't really communicate very well for 2-3 days in a row. And you get like one text a day. And maybe that's a huge break to the pattern. It's really scary. And so maybe they come back around and they're like, oh, sorry. And you're like, it's fine. And you want to reconnect quickly. And maybe it's not quite how it goes, but maybe like that's the underlying theme, is that you move back into connection very quickly so that you feel safe and you're trying to soothe through that experience more quickly. But maybe there's this, that triggered this underlying wound that's like, I'm abandoned, I'm going to be abandoned. What you're going to see is, unless you resolve the new built-in emotional associations connected to that experience of the person being missing for 3 days or hardly talking to you for 3 days, then that's going to just show up in different places. It's going to come out in ugly ways. It's going to come out, and not that anything that like the anxious does is ugly. I mean, like as a term, right? To express it, it comes out in a not so nice way compared to in a healthier way, right? And so what happens, right, is you might then, the next time the person starts going missing for an afternoon or pulls back for an afternoon, you overreact. And it may not be because it's even what you want to do in the relationship to that person or how you would consciously want to respond, but it's because 3 months ago, when the person kind of got missing for 3 days, it triggered these core wounds. And now you've like built up again. It's like more stuff in your volcano waiting to erupt. And so how do you transform these things? Well, I notice overall that that anxious preoccupied forgive easily with like general things, but they have this harder time around their core wounds specifically. And these are things like, I'm abandoned, I am alone, I'm not good enough, I will be rejected, I will be unsafe because I am disconnected, these sorts of things. So in these areas, when you want to create full forgiveness and you want to forgive, or you want your partner or your ex or whoever it might be to forgive you if they're the anxious preoccupied, you need to know that the anxious person needs to feel safe and wanted. And this will help them to forgive. If they feel safe and wanted, they feel like, okay, I can fully be myself. And actually they become less anxious. And a lot of those anxious behaviors that come out as coping mechanisms, like, calling a lot or spending too much time together where it can become slightly codependent, a lot of these things start to drop away and fall off as long as they feel overall safe and wanted. So you can create this by being consistent, by being congruent, by giving lots of words of affirmation, by expressing love, by expressing through actions. And as long as they know that like they're safe, they're wanted, they're not going to be abandoned. If you have conversations about, planning for your next steps in the relationship or the future of a relationship, and it doesn't have to be like, you're like, 3 months into dating and you're like, this is the house we're going to live in with our children. Like, you don't have to go like that. It just can be like, it'll be really fun to go on a trip in 2 weeks or in a month, or we should try this at one point in the summer, or just things that are saying like, hey, I'm here, I'm interested, I care, I'm sort of here planning the future. So these things are huge for the anxious preoccupied to forgive and come around and to feel open and safe again. And the last thing is understanding is key. And this sort of is something that the anxious shares with the fearful avoidant, where they can be hypervigilant as well. Fearful avoidants are interesting in their hypervigilance because they tend to be hypervigilant about everything, whereas anxious preoccupied tend to be very hypervigilant specifically about potentially being not good enough, abandoned, or unsafe because they're disconnected. And so when you can share, like maybe you went missing for the full day and then you know it's 7 p.m. and you haven't really talked the whole day and you're like, I am so sorry. I have been so busy and this is what happened today. And maybe it's not even something that necessarily calls for an apology, because maybe it's in the early, it depends on the stages of a relationship. Like obviously if you're like 2 years together and you're used to touching base every morning, and then the pattern breaks, you want to take ownership and be like, oh, I noticed this shifted or this changed. But as long as there's like transparency and honesty and vulnerability and communication, it prevents the anxious preoccupied attachment style from taking their hypervigilance around these fears and projecting them onto the experience of you going missing and feeling like that means I'm going to be abandoned. So if you say no, it doesn't, you don't even have to say it doesn't mean that. But if you say, hey, this is what happened, and you help fill in the blanks for them and explain, they don't have this gray area that then triggers that unsafety and fear. So before I close out this video, I want to say one other thing. It is not the job for any single person to fix their partner. Everybody is 100% accountable for their 50% of a relationship. But we can work together, and part of interdependence is taking each other's wounds into consideration, working to create healthy compromises, being open, being vulnerable, being transparent. And it is also each individual's opportunity in the places that, like, let's say you're the anxious person watching this and you feel unsafe and you feel alone and abandoned. That's feedback. If those things are alive, if those things show up in your life, it means that you want to reprogram them. You weren't born with this like fear of disconnecting, and this, to a certain degree you actually are, because you are born with a need for attunement and attachment. But the way it manifests in your adult life, if it's disproportionate, if you're anxious preoccupied attachment style, you're not born with like all these stories and narratives like, oh, the person's going to leave, this is going to happen at any time, something bad's going to happen, the other shoe's going to drop, I can feel them pulling away, it means this, this, and this. All these narratives were created because of fear-based associations that got built into your subconscious through repetition and emotional imprinting. And you can reprogram these things. And so I just want to say too, like, because I feel like maybe this video came across as sort of being like, this is how you can fix your anxious partner. No, there are things that the partner can do and support they can provide that will be so helpful in terms of like that transparency and honesty. But also I highly encourage the anxious preoccupied individual to show up for their own wounds, their own fears, and work on breaking through and reprogramming those things, specifically because for you, more than for anybody else, by far, you deserve to not have to feel that way in a relationship and not have those things running your life in the way that they can be in those triggering moments. So I hope that all makes sense. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe to this channel if you're getting a lot of value and if you want to check in with the different daily videos that we're doing. And I will see you in the next video.